Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, May 22nd, 2017. 20. I'm just going to stand here and say 20. I should get a standing desk so I can literally stand there and say that. We are in, what are we in, like day 3 of the overseas trip, the Trump shambles. He's out of Saudi Arabia. I see Twitter discussing the fact that Wilbur Ross, who for whatever reason decided to tag along on the trip, did he bring the whole cabinet, or just the billionaires of the cabinet, or just a few of it? Wilbur Ross seems to be in it mostly to hang out with Donald Trump. Have you noticed that? I mean, he's also a Palm Beach resident. He's got his own mansion down there near Pervalago, so he just goes over for dinner every day. Every day the president is there, he's hanging out there, and he goes on all the trips. And I mean, I understand Commerce Secretary, there's things to do, certainly as Commerce Secretary, and there's a lot of commerce going on as between the United States and Saudi Arabia. But I don't know, whatever. I'm sure he's keeping busy, shuffling around in $500, $600, $700 slippers. Anyway, he says Saudi Arabia is liberalizing, but then, as Lachlan Markey points out, in the next sentence, marvels that they saw no protesters in Saudi Arabia. How can you match that? I guess they really love that. Commerce Secretary praises lack of protesters during Trump's Saudi visit. Of course, he likely has no idea that that's absolutely prohibited, and he's on someone's private estate. He thinks it's a country. We're all encouraged to think of it as a country, but you know how Saudi Arabia really is. I think in bringing new people into the our Kagro in the Morning way of thinking about Saudi Arabia, it struck me over the weekend that it ought to be thought of in terms of being a Saudi-Alago, I guess, would be a great way to describe what's going on there. And the seeming contradiction between Trump's Islamophobia and his great love for the Saudi royals. Of course, it's easily explained. Everyone understands that it's money, that it's at the root of it, and he pretty readily admits that it's money that's at the root of it. But it should be thought of this way. If you were Wilbur Ross, for instance, and you had a mansion nearby Mar-a-Lago, and you decided to go over and visit your neighbor / president / boss, whatever, at his mansion, you would say, for instance, like if I asked you, do you like Mar-a-Lago? You would say, yes, I love Mar-a-Lago. I love the grounds. I love the guy who owns the place. I love to hang out there. We love to have fun there. And I would then say, well, I don't understand, because this person right here who wants to talk to you is a housekeeper or a busboy at Mar-a-Lago. Why won't you talk to him? I thought you loved Mar-a-Lago. And none of us would have any difficulty understanding why this kind of person would not be interested in speaking to someone who merely worked at Mar-a-Lago. Oh, very interesting. You know, if they were polite, they would say, oh, wonderful, love your work, or whatever. But generally speaking, we don't believe that Wilbur Ross would give someone like that the time of day. And that explains the relationship with Saudi Arabia. Are we Islamophobic? Do we hate Muslims? Sure, absolutely, certainly. Well, what about these Muslims? Well, these are rich Muslims. They own the country. I like them. They give me money. They hobnob with me. They love to give away golden things. They're very much in tune with me. The rest of the people they enslave here to make that work, them I don't care about so much. They're absolutely necessary to the function of the place, and if the function changed, I'd be very upset, but they're throwaway people. We don't regard them in any real way. So, yeah, I think that probably wraps things up in terms of how you should regard the weird feelings on display, or the weird thoughts on display with respect to their regard for Islam and their regard for the Saudi royals. They're two totally different things, and most of the people who live in Saudi Arabia are pretty well aware of that too, and they don't really love the idea of being ruled by the Saudi royals either. They're just not that much they're allowed to do about it, and it's a pretty brutal regime, and you're risking your life if you stick your neck out there. Literally, do not stick your neck out in Saudi Arabia. They will chop it. So be careful, unless you're rich or American, or both, in which case it's great to see you. Come on in and we'll give you an award. He had a fun weekend. He's now off to Israel, and we'll check in on what he's doing to wreck that relationship perhaps a little bit later in the show. In the meantime, Greg Dworkin arriving for his morning assignment. Good morning, Greg. Happy Monday.
Hey, good morning. It is a happy Monday.
Yeah, it's all right. It's a little drizzly out. And
yeah, but you know what?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yeah.
What do you know?
What?
What do you know?
Who, me?
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't read anything. I obsessed over the Saudi Arabia thing for most of the weekend. He didn't do anything terrible, by the way. He didn't blow anything up. And he was very conciliatory given what he could have done with his speech. And then I tuned out.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to tell you, it's my birthday today.
Oh, so, hey, all right.
You know, it may be raining and drizzly, but, you know, not always.
Skype usually says something, which is kind of odd, but.
I told Skype to shut up.
Okay.
You know, the thing about this trip, if you step back and look at the whole big picture, first of all, the trip isn't done yet, but a couple of things strike me. He goes to Saudi Arabia. He has his, sword dance.
Oh, yes, I missed that. I heard about it. I want to go back and take a look.
He has his dark room with the glowing orb in the middle that everybody's touching. Right. Because, as somebody pointed out, they're summoning Cthulhu. Right? So they have that. Thing. But more importantly, and yes, Wilbur Ross said it's fantastic that there's no protests here. You know, there was probably very few protests against anti-Semitism at the Berlin Games, too. And somebody else, John Hagner, points out he grew up partially in Saudi Arabia, and a friend of his was executed for having a joint in his bag.
Is that right?
Yeah. So, you know, they can be pretty strict about certain things.
Well.
But when you step back and you look at the big picture, he goes to Saudi Arabia, an ally, makes a $110 billion arms deal to send more arms so they can blow up Yemen some more, as Chris Murphy, our senator, points out. Not a great idea. And does it by giving them a discount because, they can't afford it. And what a great deal for America.
Yeah.
But, he does this. And fine, a lot of that is politics as usual. But the interesting thing is then what happens when he gets to Israel, and the question's going to be, how much does he blab about the discussions he had with the Saudi king?
That's a good question.
It's supposed to be confidential, but he's not very good at, holding things confidential. So that'll be one interesting aspect of it. Another interesting aspect.
He owes him, too. He owes him a make good on this. He should tell him something good about the Saudi king.
Right. He already told the Israelis that the Saudi king really wants peace.
Oh.
He told me.
Yeah? Oh, all right. Well, that's good. I understand there's a peace plan out there now that, I don't know,
Well, I have an article I plopped into the lineup here that I gave you from Politico. Can Jason Greenblatt deliver peace for Donald Trump? Jason Greenblatt is the special envoy. And David Friedman, I think, is the U.S. ambassador. Relevant because of a Trump tweet that's already come out, basically telling them that I'm all for peace, and if these guys can't get peace, then it's your fault, Israel.
Oh, they're fired.
You're fired. The exact tweet was Trump with Israel President Rivlin said it's on Greenblatt and Friedman to negotiate peace. If not, quote, if not, you'll be blamed because I just put it on record. Right? Because I just said that we want Middle East peace. So, if it doesn't happen, it's your fault, not mine. Bye. I'm going back.
All right. Yeah.
That's what I love about, Trump and his in-depth understanding of the world, politics.
Yeah. I think they're all a little bit like that.
So, the other interesting thing is that whereas there was a scandal a minute leak last week, now that he's out of the country, not so much. Does that mean that the leakers went with him and they don't have access to the press? Or does it mean that the leakers back at the White House know it's really not a smart thing to leak while everybody is away because it's much more convenient to plausibly deny that you did it and say it was Bannon? But how does that happen when, Bannon's overseas? So, we'll see what happens with that. But it's just the political intrigue, the palace intrigue It's kind of fascinating. Since,
in a literal palace.
Since the whole White House leaks like a sieve.
Yeah.
And yet they're strategically doing it because they're not doing it so much while he's away, because who wants to get caught and then, beheaded? Because he's going to come back from Saudi Arabia with ideas.
Yes. And we have to watch and see what happens to the gold collar, too. I'm actually curious about this. There's protocol for, you have to give that stuff up because it's an emolument, but we already know he's violating the emoluments clause left and right. I wonder if he just tries to keep all the gold.
He gives it to Ivanka.
That's true. They could.
It stays in the family, but then, he didn't keep it. So
yeah.
What's your problem?
Right. That side of the family is allowed to keep all their stuff, I think. Huh. It's an idea. It's an
idea.
Right.
That's all I could say. On the world stage here, as long as we're talking about the world stage, here's an article from Spiegel.
So rare that we do, yes.
And remember, my German is awful. Even with coaching, it's pretty bad.
Mine.
Thank you for the corrections. They're well necessary. But Spiegel has an article here, which is in English, so I can read it.
Oh, good.
A danger to the world. It's time to get rid of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has transformed the United States into a laughingstock, and he is a danger to the world. He must be removed from the White House before things get even worse.
What do you mean?
And you can get a sense of what it says.
Yes.
They say he has to be impeached because they just don't think that he'll do the right thing and resign.
Oh, well, no. Well, he may turn the heat up enough, but
right,
yeah,
right. Because and the other side of the coin is that he's 7 years old. This is an exhausting trip, and I think that at the end of this trip, he's going to be even more tired of being president than he is now. That's the third thing that I take out of this trip.
I was thinking over the weekend. I mean, they were saying after 2 days he was canceling events or
yes, because he's exhausted because low energy.
Right, and he changed. That's interesting. They blamed the changing or the lack of any mention of radical Islamic terrorism
because he was tired.
Yeah, is that difficult to say? Is it take a lot of energy?
I think it was Hillary's fault.
Certainly.
I think
it's not Obama's. Then
it's
certainly
because she had an awful campaign, and that's why he forgot to say
it. It was good. She didn't go to Wisconsin.
Yeah, exactly. But there's that Spiegel piece, and then here's a piece from USA Today, just for contrast, written by Joe Lawrence, one of their editorial board and columnists. Donald Trump to America, please impeach me.
There's a good song parody there for
I know.
Please
impeach me. Let me go. This president is all but shouting, get me out of here.
Yeah.
We should help.
All right. If you ask nicely, I will help.
Now, understand that, and of course you do, that the process says that until we take the House back in 2018, impeachment is going nowhere. But I just think it's fascinating that 122 days into his reign of this particular president, these things are already there. And it's not just hyperpartisanship. It's that he's awful. So around the world and in the U.S., impeachment is not one of those things that you have to whisper in dark corners. And you don't get lambasted the way you would for bringing it up during the Bush era when it was totally unpatriotic. These days, it's simply a sign of the times that it's a topic of discussion. And the topic of discussion is strategy and tactics, not whether or not you're allowed to talk about it. I just think that's fascinating.
That is nice. It's good to see. And it's true. It's discussed internationally. I mean, it used to be, a lot of people would have thought of it as a great horror to even discuss the word, usually at any time, really, but I mean, much less when the president's overseas. You remember, there used to be a whole doctrine about that.
Yes.
This politics
stops at the water's edge.
Right, now we just stick your head under the water.
Well, there's no water anymore, right? It's all dried up, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, either that or sea level's rising and there's no point in trying to delineate where the water's edge is. Tomorrow it'll be over here, so you might as well just go ahead.
Exactly. Beachfront property in Kansas City. Love it. So let's talk about conspiracies.
All right. I believe you already have.
You want to talk about left or right?
Left.
Left. Okay. So, as you know, Louise Mensch and others have this bizarre set of articles about how there are sealed indictments of Trump that are about to go out by the marshals, and the marshals are going to go and do the X, Y, and Z, and somehow or other it's sealed until we don't know why. Some really bizarre articles about how all this works.
There are such things as sealed indictments. It's just...
I know. It's not like the marshals are going to go and have a nice stern talk with him. I mean, it's like, did they ever see Schoolhouse Rock? Do they know how the bill works? Do they know?
No.
Do they know how this
Louise
whole process works? I don't think so.
Which is weird. Louise was a legislator, not here in the United States.
Not here in the U.S.
But still, you should have some sense of how these processes work. But I told you people there was something screwy about her, and it's getting screwier each day. Now it's pretty obvious. Everybody knows.
Yeah, so people are making fun of her. So there's this Simon Malloy not tweet storm, but a list in his Twitter feed, which is actually pretty funny because they're talking about this particular article and this whole idea. And the reason that you haven't heard about it yet, even though she and her followers have, Simon Malloy says, that's because it's been sealed harder and referred to the Surgeon General.
Okay.
Kevin Cruz says, well, I heard the Inspector General and Inspector Gadget have now been consulted, and it's now going to the Ministry of Sound. And Eric Geller adds, well, I heard the Supreme Court had to recuse itself because of Gorsuch, so it's now being referred to the Justice League.
Okay.
I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and I think appropriately so. It's the dumbest stuff. I don't mind conspiracy theories now and again, but at least make them interesting. The Illuminati and the Knights Templar and stuff like that, it's interesting.
Yeah.
This stuff, not so much.
The one that caught my eye was at some point over the weekend, she insisted that impeachment had begun, that an impeachment process
secretly,
had begun.
Right? Because the FISA court is keeping it all from the public or something. I don't know. I'm having trouble following the logic here.
The part that struck me was, her first assertion was that that Trump had been notified immediately before departure on his trip, that the process had begun. And of course there is a process, and I guess it begins somewhere, but her impression of it was...
there was a Democrat, who was it, Al Green, who stood up and said, I think he needs to be impeached, and Maxine Waters has said it. So you could argue that the process has started.
Sure. It was her assertion, though, was that some kind of formal process had begun, and that it was the Marshal of the United States Supreme Court, that the court had been notified that the process had begun, and that they had dispatched their marshal, and they do have a marshal, to meet Trump at the airport to let him know, listen, we just got to tell you, according to the process, that the process has begun. The Supreme Court has been notified of it, and they need to notify you. And of course, there's no provision for notifying the Supreme Court of anything. I suppose, there is a role for the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court if the president is impeached, presides over the trial, but that would be way down the line. The House would have to actually impeach you first before you bother the Supreme Court about anything. But I don't know. I guess she just thought surely they have some kind of role in all this because she's British and doesn't know the American system, I guess, or just figured no one else did. I don't know. I'm not sure. Or maybe she heard something and got it wrong and yada yada. But yeah, the Supreme Court doesn't do anything in impeachment.
She has exclusives on this.
Okay. Well, yeah, no one else will say it. Exclusive.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. So, there's that on the left, just fine if you want to follow her and others like her for entertainment value. I don't really care. Just don't tweet me as if it has gravitas.
Well, yeah, tweet me. It's something
David.
to talk
David
about
likes
on the air. Okay.
On the other hand, there's more pernicious stuff happening on the right.
Yes.
There's this fellow, Seth Rich. Let me read you from Dave Weigel's story in the Washington Post.
All right.
On July 10th at 4:19 a.m., gunfire was detected in the district's Bloomingdale neighborhood. That's D.C., I suppose.
Gunfire detected. That would probably be the shot spotter.
Shots fired.
System. Okay.
Not 5 minutes later, police found Seth Rich, a 27-year-old Democratic National Committee staffer, lying on the ground, dying from a bullet wound to his back. A conscious Rich was transported to the hospital. By daybreak, he was dead. Nearly 1 year later, Rich's death remains one of America's thousands of unsolved murders and the focus of endless conspiracy theories spread this past week by Fox News, alt-right social media, a local D.C. news station, and the Russian embassy in Britain. And Sean Hannity is like tripling down on this and being incredibly obnoxious about it. The reemergence of the conspiracy theory this week, which did not lack for real news, revealed plenty about the fake news ecosystem, or to use BuzzFeed's useful phrase, the upside-down media, in the Trump era. It also happened to cause untold pain for the Rich family, which has sent a cease and desist letter to the so-called private investigator who led this dive back into the fever swamp. And here's what we learned. First, TV news can be an easy mark. This iteration of the Seth Rich story started when the district's owned Fox 5 ran a Monday exclusive citing one source, a Fox new legal commentator, Rod Wheeler, for a big break in the investigation. Mm-hmm. They reported that the conspiracy theories could be proven right, as Wheeler was saying what had been rumored since last year, that Rich might have leaked DNC emails to WikiLeaks, making him the target of an assassination.
Sure.
Within 24 hours, reporters at NBC News, CNN, and the Washington Post had debunked the story. First, Rich's family quickly corrected the idea that Wheeler was on the payroll. He was hired by Ed Butowski, a Texas businessman who had grown interested in the case. Wheeler told CNN he hadn't actually obtained information linking Rich to WikiLeaks. Fox 5 had told him to say so.
Oh.
The reporter didn't cite any sources except Wheeler, not the Rich family, not D.C. police, not the mayor's office, not the DNC. Wheeler, a very occasional TV pundit, was notably skimpy on details, suggesting he had a source who told him eyeball to eyeball Rich's computer was in lockup and that it had evidence of WikiLeaks contact. But he was murky on whether D.C. police or the FBI allegedly had the laptop, and so the family quickly reported that neither did. Okay, so as Dave points out, most forms of reporting have guardrails that this story would have crashed against. Had the channel waited to run the story until the family or the police weighed in, it couldn't have aired, but that's the problem. There's fluff allowance on TV, one that lets sensational videos through even if they haven't been vetted. That's why a quick perusal of local news will often find segments devoted to viral videos of phenomenon Nathan Fielder tested in an episode of his Gonzo series, Nathan for You. Not one I'm familiar with. In retrospect, it seems natural for the fake story to resurface via a small TV station, but what caused it to surface at all? Well, fake news is weakened on Facebook, but its bots still own Twitter. With very little fanfare, likely a result of the backlash it got from conservatives after Gawker revealed its editorial policy for news feeds, Facebook has seriously cracked down on the ability of conspiracy and clickbait sites to make stories trend. There's been no similar crackdown on Twitter. Twitter is famous, by the way, for its libertarian views, and that's why we have so many Pepe things and, Nazis and deplorables on Twitter, which they do nothing about. Where conspiracy theorists can still coordinate, start trends, and benefit when bots chime in. That happened this week in a big way. The theory that Rich must have been killed by nefarious forces at the DNC as punishment for his betrayal to WikiLeaks has bubbled long enough to have several memes ready for the latest eruption, even before the Fox 5 segment. The Seth Rich and his name was Seth Rich hashtag were active. The latest break came when Robin Young, a former model who calls herself a Bond girl on the strength of a small role in For Your Eyes Only, published unverified messages that she claimed showed the hacker Guccifer 2 crediting Rich for the leak. The hashtag took off in the wake of the Fox 5 report, a familiar swirl of conservative media, Drudge, Breitbart, Rand People are saying updates because it's trending, therefore it must be true, right? It was that attention that caused Wheeler to be debunked. And the most effective conspiracy theories actually target both the left and the alt-right. What's often forgotten about the DNC hack is how banal the emails were. There were three major hacks of the Democrats' political operation: the DNC hack released by WikiLeaks, the Democratic Congressional Committee hack, and the hack of Clinton campaign Podesta, which were released in a daily dump through October. The resignation of Debbie Wasserman Schultz during the Democratic convention fed into the idea that the DNC hack must have been devastating and revealing, in the words of Fox News conspiracy theorist Sean Hannity, that the DC was conspiring to hurt Bernie Sanders and help Hillary Clinton win the nomination. That's not what the emails revealed, writes Dave. In fact, Wasserman Schultz's mismanagement of the DNC and personal bias toward Hillary Clinton had been known and a sore spot for supporters of Sanders long before the hack. Wasserman Schultz scheduled debates late in the process, had to be pushed by the Sanders campaign to allow a debate before the New York primary. Clinton, who'd narrowly lost 2008, came into 2016 with the vast majority of endorsements from party leaders, not actually a factor under the DNC's control. What the email found was in May, after Sanders had no serious chance at the nomination. Let me repeat that. After Sanders had no serious chance at the nomination, some DNC staffers got irresponsibly snarky and irritated. I have follow-up on that. On May 1st, the follow-up isn't about this. It's about what happened in California at the Democratic convention there over the weekend. On May 1st, for example, Wasserman Schultz reacted to news that Sanders would seek to contest the nomination at the convention by writing as so much for a traditional presumptive nominee. But by May 1st, Clinton had a lead in the delegate count and popular vote that was not going to be outpaced by Sanders, even if he won a landslide in California. The theory that Rich was offended by these emails assumes that he saw them, which is not suggested. He would have interpreted exasperated emails as proof of anti-Sanders perfidy that the world needed to see. This doesn't comport with reality, but it's attractive to the most diehard progressive foes of Clinton. This Rich conspiracy derived not because fringe conservatives like the idea of a break in the Clinton body count theory, but that the idea that somebody would murder a leaker to cover up a conspiracy against Bernie Sanders, and that would justify so much angst. Briefly, before Wheeler recanted his story, the Young Turks Network Jimmy Dore show chewed over the revelation that Rich was in contact with WikiLeaks in a largely frivolous lawsuit against the DNC announced in July, playing out in a Florida court now, has been aggressively covered by the Russian propaganda network RT. But debunking a story doesn't end it. Sean Hannity, who's now a sort of elder statesman in Fox News' primetime lineup, devoted parts of 3 episodes this week to the Rich story. That's really what's giving it its prominence. Yeah. The first of these episodes ended in a wreck, with Wheeler giving his last public interview to date, recanting much of his story about Rich and babbling about how a credible source told him a story consistent with perhaps maybe it's possible that Rich maybe emailed WikiLeaks. Mm-hmm. Maybe. Okay. And so Rush Limbaugh also rolled over, and the absolute faith that there will one day be proof of this conspiracy theory is impervious to reality. Oh. None of it makes sense. That means we're never going to stop hearing about it.
All right.
That's Dave Weigel's story, and I think it's a good overview of what's happening with the Seth Rich thing, yes, and why you hear Sean Hannity's name about it. And now on Twitter, Hannity is basically calling everybody, the Rich family contacted Hannity and I guess certainly the private investigator with a cease and desist letter. And whether in fact anything happens from that, we don't know. But Hannity is now criticizing anybody on Twitter who calls him a jerk, as, special snowflakes go away. Right. This just proves Julian Assange says that it's true, therefore it must be true, and all sorts of weird stuff. Mm. So, Hannity is going the Glenn Beck route and just like going insane before our very eyes.
Yeah, I guess so. Although he's going straight to like Sandy Hook truther level with.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. So, it's just something to keep an eye on, and that's why I'm letting your listeners know. You're probably not Hannity watchers, but as Fox collapses, it's kind of interesting to see that. By collapse, I mean they're not getting the viewership they did. And MSNBC with Rachel Maddow, and perhaps a continuing Lawrence. Because Lawrence O'Donnell had so much fan support that Andy Lack and MSNBC is now reopening his contract negotiations, which are up in June. Okay. So maybe he stays in the lineup. And that's always of interest. But, with all of that, it'll be interesting to see what's going on.
Yes, the television world is shaking itself up over this. But, yeah, the Sean Hannity's, I mean, I don't know. Is it even worth discussing whether Sean Hannity's behavior is deplorable?
No,
it is.
It's not.
And
it's not at all.
It is deplorable, not much worth discussion, but that's where things stand.
Yeah, this is just an informational, it's, there are friends of ours out there in, blog world and podcast world do a wonderful job of debunking people like that. I don't have the time. It's not worth the effort.
Yeah. Okay, so just by way of weekend update.
Yeah, pretty much.
We know that's happening.
Just, because you'll hear it and then you'll hear the Seth Rich thing brought up, and I just thought it was good for background that everybody know what it is.
Okay. It is rather sad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me bring you one blast from the past.
Oh.
And then, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the California Democratic, Convention.
Oh, okay. Sure.
And then I'm done. And then I'm out of here.
All right. Now,
go celebrate my birthday day in different ways.
Oh, yeah?
So, listen, this is a Art Buchwald column.
Okay. Art is calling. Hi, good morning, Art. It may be birthday wishes. Do you want to answer that?
I really don't.
Okay. All right. All right, but
here, I'm playing with the on-off button, trying to silence it. Just for fun. Just like it's my birthday.
Okay, that's on.
All right, that's the fourth ring, so it'll go over the answering machine. So this Art Buchwald column.
All right.
A response checklist. This is, I think, 1972 or 73, if I'm not mistaken.
Right now it is? Wow.
These are difficult times for people who are defending the Nixon administration. No matter where they go, they are attacked by pseudo-liberals, McGovern lovers, heterosexual constitutionalists and paranoid John Dean believers.
I'm sorry, what? Do you have the link to this? I got to follow along. I'm not sure. I'm already lost. Heterosexual what?
All right, let me send you. It's in a tweet from Steve Silberman. I think it's on your list, but let me just send it to you at the bottom.
Holy cow!
It's a little blurry because what he did is he took a picture of the column.
All right.
But it's really quite funny.
Oof. Oh my gosh! I thought this would clear up my headache. Nope.
Can you open it up and see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. As a public service, I'm printing instant responses for loyal Nixonites when they are attacked at a party. Please cut it out and carry it in your pocket.
Okay.
Now, for those who don't know who Art Buchwald was, he was a regular columnist who was actually quite funny back in the day. He actually wrote a play called Sheep on the Runway, which I still remember.
Huh. All right.
About a third world country who was having trouble with their airport. But he just gives responses that the Nixon people under siege should give. And the reason it's so interesting is you're going to find it awfully familiar in 2017. Awfully familiar.
Yeah.
For example,
I need to see it.
Response number 1, everyone does it.
Right. Sure.
Response number 2, what about Chappaquiddick?
And that didn't stop either.
What about Obama? What about Hillary?
They literally said, we're saying, what about Chappaquiddick, up through the work on the Affordable Care Act when Ted Kennedy died. You can't pass this. What about Chappaquiddick?
Yeah. Number 3, a president can't keep track of everything his staff does.
That's
right? Number 4, the press is blowing the whole thing up.
Familiar.
Number 5, whatever Nixon did, it was for national security.
Yes.
And my favorite, number 6, the Democrats are just sore losers because they lost the election. That is
happening right now.
Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Number 7, are you going to believe a rat like John Dean or the President of the United States? Number 8, wait till all the facts are in. Number 9, what about Chappaquiddick? And then, okay, does this sound familiar? You can't impeach Nixon. If you impeach Nixon, you get Agnew.
Well, yeah,
does that sound familiar?
Will we get Agnew now?
Yeah.
Not Agnew. Okay.
The only thing wrong with Watergate is they got caught.
Right.
And what about Daniel Ellsberg stealing the Pentagon Papers? It's the leakers that are the problem, right?
Right.
Besides, it happens in Europe all the time. And people would be against him no matter what he did. Frankly, I'd rather have a crook in the White House than a fool. What if you have both?
Yeah, right. Well, that's true.
LBJ used to read FBI reports every night, and Obama wiretapped me. I mean, it's eerie in terms of reading these and saying, I think these have been recycled.
Well, yes, they have. And, we always used to say about, everything else during the Bush administration that every fight, particularly Cheney's fights, were about relitigating Watergate. And they were. I mean, we weren't just being hyperbolic about it. They were above board about it, too. They said, the campaign finance reforms that we put in place.
They've gone too far.
Yeah. So we're rolling all these things back. But, I guess that's also, it reminds me a lot of when we pulled out the old records from even back to the 30s, when passing the Social Security Act and in the 60s passing Medicare or Medicaid acts, that all the Republican complaints were all the same, that they would destroy the economy, that they were creeping socialism, etc. They really have not changed their tune on anything, ever. Well, right. They are. That's the only thing in which they're conservative. So I guess we should applaud that. Right. So here's more. Other snappy responses when you criticize Nixon. Well, McGovern would have lost anyway. McGovern would have won. That would. Bernie would have won, but McGovern would have lost. Maybe the committee for the re-election for president, the wonderful creep committee, it couldn't be named better, went a little too far, but they were just a bunch of eager kids, like Don Segretti. The rat effers, remember them? Oh yeah, and kids they were. Right. Nixon made a mistake. He's only human. And by the way, what about Chappaquiddick? Yes. Right. Franklin D. Roosevelt did a lot of worse things. And I'm sick and tired of hearing about Watergate, and so is everybody else. Yes. Right? Easy. My country, right or wrong. But besides, what about Chappaquiddick? That's a good question. Right? I think all the people who make all this fuss about Watergate should be lined up and shot. Oh, yeah, that's a nice response, too. That settles things.
But personally, I never trusted Haldeman and Ehrlichman anyway.
Ah.
Okay, and if you say one more word about Watergate, I'll punch you in the nose. So Art Buchwald gives some final comments. If the person is bigger than you, you say one more word about Watergate, I'm leaving this house. Okay. Or if it's your house and the person is bigger than you, then you say, well, yeah, what about Chappaquiddick?
That helps.
Yeah. So I think he nailed it, but it's just pretty funny reading that because when you read them, you can, with very, very little difficulty, simply find exactly what's going on in a parallel way right here in terms of the response that you get from the Trumpites, Trumpsters, Trumpkins. And so I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's turn to California Democratic Convention.
All right. I'm just seeing the pictures.
There's, very powerful nurses union there, leftist leaning, and I have great respect and affection for. Very much pushing single payer as a next step in terms of the evolution of the Affordable Care Act and the American Health Care Act. And don't want to take no for an answer. This is from Malcolm Johnson, who is a party regular, and wrote a little piece about it in terms of what happened over the weekend. And this is in Medium, and I'm going to give you the link here. And I think it's pretty relevant, and it's not rehashing the primary. It's what's going on now.
Oh.
He's there, and the convention was this weekend. And he says, first of all, it goes without saying that Sacramento absolutely deserves to host the California Dem Convention, but the facilities lacked for size. The convention center was too damn small for a convention of our size. But what I really wanted to talk about was all the new blood that has come into the party and my very mixed feelings about them.
Oh.
Is it good to have new blood in the political party? Of course it is. New blood and new ideas help spur growth and change. But when the central core of the new ideas is that the party sucks, well, that's not going to go over well.
Okay. That'll put a damper on your convention anyway.
It will. I mean, I spent the weekend being told what an absolute failure the Democratic Party was and how it needed to change or die. Really? Last I checked, my party got 3 million more votes than the other guy, and California did spectacularly well for Hillary in 2016. So what exactly are we failing at? Oh, we're not immediately signing on to your new ideas. And thus we come to the crux of the problem. The new Bernie-crats complete and utter failure to do the one key thing in politics, and that is to persuade. He's pretty harsh, but I think it's instructive. Obama volunteers in 2007, 2008 were masters at this. They recognized the need to persuade, to convince others he was okay to vote for. Not easy. Like in 2016, Hillary was a known commodity, and Obama was black, for pity's sake. Some Democrats actually said the election was too important to take a chance on a black man. But the OFA volunteers recognized the fact. They took the time to talk to folks. They answered people's questions. They persuaded. If somebody was a no-go on Obama, they moved on to the next person. No ill feelings. Why waste the time? They were professional and moved on to the next gettable voter. The people I saw in Sacramento, not all, but way too many, were not doing that. They basically approached people with the attitude of you're failing, it's your fault for making it fail. And the response from many a Democratic delegate or voter was, excuse me? It wasn't so much nasty as it was arrogant. Arrogance of youth, perhaps. If you worked in 2016 as hard as I did, it's a little insulting to hear. Example, all throughout the first day's floor session, there were chants of single-payer health care. At a Democratic Party convention, people were chanting at other Democrats over single freaking payer. Our outgoing chairman, John Burton, took the podium at one point and said, is there something Democrats find controversial about single payer? There is a bill going through the legislative process in Sacramento, and pressure needs to be applied, but what kind of pressure? I could also tell you about the time a liberal tried to convince an Armenian American there was nothing wrong with the name the Young Turks, but that's a whole other thread. And should I mention how some of the more active delegates tried to shout down DNC Chair Tom Perez at the chairman's reception Friday night, only to have John Burton tell them to shut the F up and go outside, and with video. John Burton's stepping down. And there was a big election about who's going to replace him, and it was a close election, but the party regular won.
Oh, wow.
And that happened over the weekend as well. So he points out the idea is to rally your friends, not confuse them, or worse, to piss them off. It didn't help. that Bernie's name was invoked at the convention way more than the former nominee Hillary Clinton. Granted, I know that people love them some Bernie for whatever reason, but I also know Bernie's not a member of the party. Not trying to be insulting. That's just the way it is. He's not a Democrat. So what he goes on to say, and then Nina Turner was there, and he talks a little bit about her, but you can't lose an election and then blame the people who didn't agree with you and then claim there was cheating or dirty tricks. That's what happened for the chair race. Because what happened is that the candidate for one faction wound up losing to the party regular, and there were some bad feelings about it, but a very, very close vote. So don't say that the party is fundamentally corrupt because they didn't vote the way you wanted. And again, goes on and on and on to talk about the process. And just my note here, I think it's a fascinating piece in terms of where things are right at the moment. And what I wrote this morning on the Pundit Roundup when I put it is that it isn't a rehash of the primaries, it's what's going on right now. So here's the thing. If you want to be part of the party, you have to accept the party. And that means persuading and not stonewalling or insisting you're right to the point of obstruction. And it means fighting hard to win and accepting when you lose. You have to accept when you lose. It's not like all rigged and corrupt and you know, sometimes you just plain lose and somebody has more votes than you do. And when that happens, you have to move on. And that goes for everybody. It isn't hard, but you can make it hard. And you can make it controversial when it's really not controversial. Right now, I think the focus has to be on winning back the House, and there's plenty of California seats that are Republican that could be Democrat, Darrell Issa, etc. And that means working for unity and not division and keeping our eye on what's going on with Trump, which leads to a whole other piece, which was really the focus of the Pundit Roundup this morning, about how Rob Quist, for example, who's up for the special election on Thursday of this week, running ads to finish out his campaign based not on Donald Trump and impeachment, but rather on health care and how it affects Montanans. And Ossoff is doing the same thing in Georgia for June 20th. So you have people in Washington focused on what's going on with Trump in the White House, appropriately so, but you also have local grassroots candidates who are working on health care and working the angles that are most important to their constituents. And there's nothing wrong with that. There doesn't have to be a universal message, one size fits all, in these very, very disparate elections. So we'll see what happens on Thursday. And we'll see what happens next month with Ossoff. So that's the summary, and try to put in perspective why it's important in terms of what's going on in California.
Exhausting situation there.
It is, but people should know about
it. Going to as Saudi Arabia, but yeah, absolutely. California convention will draw a lot of eyes. I mean, obviously, because it's our largest. It's our largest. Pool of Democratic voters, certainly by state. I mean, it's enormous by comparison.
It's
enormous. And because it's enormous, it holds all kinds. And, I mean, well, I guess that's really a recurring theme is, we had it happening in the primaries, we had it happening, now in conventions, and it'll happen again, over and over again. There's conventions, state conventions not every state has them every year, but, there'll be plenty of opportunity to rehash this stuff, and I guess, the best lesson to draw from it all is, look, yes, there will always be these differing perspectives about what constitutes political support, what constitutes legitimate political support, and what makes legitimate support look like corruption to others, and I don't know. I'll only say this: this is an old story, in the sense that we've been through this 100 times, and there will be a lot of people who are in the mainstream leadership of these party structures who will have been through it themselves 100 times and came up this way. They're in the leadership of the party now because they
voted for McGovern back in '72 and went through all the rules fights and all the different factions of the party, and also got clocked in an election. So they see it from a lot of different ways.
And it was just as corrupt looking from the other side when they were in that position as it is to you now, and you either persist with it and eventually one day win, and then eventually you come into the position of realizing, okay, this thing that looks like corruption, sometimes it is flat outright corruption, and other times it's, I work with this person, and I don't think they're an evil bastard, And I disagree.
Can you say that on the radio? Can you say that in Rochester?
Absolutely. They're all bastards in Rochester. They know this. They call one another bastards all the time. I don't know. I really have no idea. I'm sure they're lovely people who probably say bastard a lot. Probably about us. But anyway, it's just it strikes me. I've seen this happen a couple of times. I'm not that old, but people who are in the mainstream leadership of parties, particularly those who've been in the game for decades, have been through this 100 times. And I guess at some point, it certainly looks condescending if you're new to politics or newly engaged in politics, and you see them, if you happen to catch it at the corner of your eye, watch them rolling their eyes at you, insisting that you're the establishment and you're trying to keep us out, etc. And, as fresh in their memories as being kept out by the previous establishment. Right. This does recycle on itself every once in a while.
And by the way, just to complete the thought here, I'm also including a article from the LA Times from a reporter who was at the convention. The title is Rallies, F-Bombs, and a Raucous Start to the California Democratic Party Convention, lest you get the idea that this is just one guy with a sore winner type of approach to all of this. The report from the LA Times pretty much is in parallel to what the party activist was reporting as well.
Well, not surprising, and I suppose we'll probably see replays of it in other state conventions over the next couple of weeks, and then again next year.
Right, just again, so your listeners and readers have an idea of what's going on out there and what purports to be the real world. And so if you hear about it, you heard about it here first.
Sure, bring it up, discuss
Unless you were in California, in which case you know all about it and call and correct us. Yeah. Which we'd be happy to do. If you want to give us a little report of what happened while you were there, that would be wonderful.
Sure, and there's no doubt in my mind that there's something that was misreported, underreported, incorrectly reported in some biased fashion, perhaps just a straight-up mistake. But if you're on the ground at any newsworthy event, it's a 100% chance that you saw something there differently than the reporters did, and it's valid, and we'd love to hear it, and we always feel better informed for having heard it, unless it's about, Louise Mensch, let's say.
Well, with that, I think I'll leave you. Thank you so much for having me on. This is Monday, May 22nd.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for listening, folks. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman. I'm a year older, but not necessarily a year wiser. And we'll see what the rest of the week brings. I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll talk to you then.
Okay. Let's do that then. Thanks, Greg. Happy birthday.
Hey, thanks.
Did you get a glowing orb? Would you like a glowing orb?
Yeah, I don't have enough of them.
Yeah, you can't. No one can have enough, I guess.
But I'll tell you, if I really am successful in invoking Cthulhu, there will not be a next birthday next year.
That's true. For anybody.
For anybody.
It's all over. Okay.
Take care.
Thank you. You do the same. Have a great birthday. Eat some cake or something. I don't know. What do you like to do? My son, one of my sons does not like cake, and he likes to have birthday donuts. We have like one of those, a little like a tea cake tray or something, I guess you would call it. Those 3-tiered things, and we fill them up with donuts for his birthday parties. So no cakes, just donuts. Depends on what you want to do. Are you gluten free? What do gluten free people do for? I guess you can make gluten free cakes now. I don't know if they're any good. But important news. I just wanted to let you all know that we knew that. Okay, let's see. I don't even know where I'm looking. I'm scrolling back in Pocket, trying to find where I parked everything and how far back I have to go even to get to the weekend stuff and what was left from before. I mean, there was an awful lot of stuff here. Let's see. Jared Kushner. I guess. What do we do here with this? Can we catch up on this guy? I mentioned at the end of last week that we never really did read through all the bios about him, although it really doesn't matter because most of the bios, I think most of the stuff has seeped through to us somehow by osmosis or something. Anyway, and there's not a whole lot of information about it. It's very interesting. He's kind of I wouldn't say he's necessarily a secretive guy because, of course, he's out there and he's taking a very public role and everything. But he isn't, I don't know, we don't hear much from him personally. Although I did enjoy the news that part of the entourage traveling with Trump throughout the Middle East and then into Europe, et cetera, is someone who's on the White House payroll as Jared Kushner's spokesman, which is interesting because, one, what in the world would a staffer at the White House need a spokesperson for? And I noticed that both Jared and Ivanka have got that. Ivanka has got a chief of staff, which is a brand new thing. There's, of course, a White House chief of staff. And there are, varying levels of assignment in the White House, and there are people who have bosses, et cetera. But I don't believe that there's ever been a first daughter with a chief of staff. The first lady keeps a chief of staff, but it's because their staffs are separate. I guess there's never been a first daughter who was on the payroll, who was, an actual government employee for her father while he was president. So we don't really have much to go on, but the idea that she would need a chief of staff, but as a member of the family, but even so, the first ladies get a chief of staff, and then that was it. The children have never imagine, we're all tired of hearing, what if Obama did this? But just think about the uproar that would have ensued from either or both of President Obama's daughters having a staff at all, much less a chief of staff on top of it all. And then Jared Kushner has his own spokesperson, and I guess what strikes me as weird about that is that Kushner is semi-famous in his own right for never saying anything or never being heard on the record. There have been actually, for a while, people were casting about on Twitter, like, has anybody ever heard this guy's voice? And they have. He's spoken in public before, but it took some digging to come up with a YouTube video with Jared Kushner speaking aloud. For somebody who speaks so rarely, is there really a necessity for a spokesperson? And even if he spoke all the time, it's just, I don't know, it's something improper about it. But of course, they're feathering their nests and surrounding themselves with the trappings of power, and they come from a CEO world or whatever, or they wish they were CEOs. And I guess to them that means having people. So I suppose it's normal to them. It's a very weird thing, though. And anyway, I guess I wanted to bring up about him. Man, there's a flood of information. We'll never get back, I don't think, to the background biographical stuff, and by now it seems a little old to do. But the big development over the weekend among the conspiracy-minded, although it has, it's borne itself out a little bit. There's a lot of reporting that seems to back it up. One of the controversies that followed Trump out of the country was, at the beginning of the weekend, that, let's see, I guess this was about Friday, both the Washington Post and the New York Times, both at the same time, like right at wheels up on Air Force One. The moment it took off, you must have noticed this. And we weren't on the air at that time, of course, because we were done. But the big news story of the early afternoon cycle was, let me see, I have to look them up. Which one was which? Both the Washington Post and New York Times dropped sort of semi-bombshells right as soon as he took off. One was what was the New York Times one? The New York Times one was that Trump had been heard telling the Russians when they had visited him in the White House in the Oval Office. Remember, Sergei Kislyak and, the ambassador's name, or the foreign minister's name. Kislyak is the ambassador. Lavrov, is that right? That President Trump tells them in the Oval Office that I just fired the FBI director, Jim Comey. And he makes a big deal of it, like, oh, hey, I just fired him. But he goes on to say, I just fired him. He was crazy, a real nut job. That was, of course, what got everybody up in arms, that he had said he's a real nut job, which was really amazing, that, one, he would choose to use those words, and two, to use them with the Russians, and three, that's like the first thing he tells them they get in the door. Guess what I just did? I just made a firing. I'm so powerful. Of course, Lavrov had just been asked, I thought, on his way into the White House, but I think it turns out that the questioning had taken place, in fact, the day before, late on the Tuesday, I think it was, that Trump fired Comey, and somebody asked, what do you think about that? Because they knew they knew at least that Lavrov was going to the Oval Office the next day, and they said, what do you think about the firing? And he was, like rolling his eyes and sighing about it because just sardonically, like, oh, was he fired? Really? Wow, you're kidding. I hadn't heard that. Like, you're really breaking great news here. And then, of course, first thing Trump tells him is that same stupid line, I know already, I heard he was fired, but you're such a, fine. Ooh, wow, you fired him. You're so cool and tough. Wow, that's pretty alpha there, Mr. President. Woo-wee. Love your hair. Can I get 2 scoops of ice cream? So, whatever. He decides to make a bragging point about that, which is terrible on a number of levels, as people were pointing out also. The FBI chief is the chief counter-espionage officer in the United States, and to speak to the head spies for the Russians in the United States and tell them, ha, what a great thing it was. I just fired essentially your chief adversary. And as somebody else pointed out over the weekend, the manner in which he puts it and is joking around about it and saying he's such a nut job, he's very clearly really there saying the head of the FBI was my enemy and you Russians are my friends. And that's kind of weird for an American president to be doing. And of course, also, the big blow up from this was that he goes on to say, not only did he fire him because he was crazy and a real nut job, but that I faced great pressure because of Russia, which is you, by the way. That's taken off. And then, of course, he adds, I'm not under investigation. He told me 3 times I wasn't under investigation, but I fired him anyway. But, whatever. Which, of course, just ended up on the pile of items that are, we have to, I guess, still state that they are circumstantial evidence of obstruction of justice, but it seemed pretty bold for him to be on record, and I don't know who was keeping the record of all this either, but to be on record saying, again, it was pressure over Russia, but now that's gone because I fired him, and that's why I fired him, and whatever. And people did, the contrarians spent the weekend trying to come up with explanations, and they will work, I think, to some extent. There needs to be more digging and really more admissions on the record in order to really truly have I think, a serious hope of actually, provided you can even charge him and try him on such things, and I don't know that that's going to work out either. But to nail the president on obstruction of justice, believe it or not, more needs to be done. More needs to be admitted to, and more needs to be nailed down. Because if you're really good and you're really creative as a lawyer, it's okay for, yes, the president felt pressure over Russia, but that's still, what he doesn't say is, and that's why I fired him. He implies it. He does everything but say it, but he doesn't say it, and so, you're going to have to wait and see whether he says it anywhere else. The second bombshell, and as everybody liked to joke about it on Friday, the 2 scoops before heading off into, well, not into the sunset, I guess into the sunrise, was the Washington Post's story that the Russia probe, how did they put it in their headline? Russia probe reaches current White House official, people familiar with the case say. And lots of speculation immediately as to who was that current White House official, and the description as given in the article, there was a pretty narrow slice of people that it really could have been. And it came down, I think most people thought, to Bannon or Kushner. And within about an hour, everybody had decided it was Kushner. And I guess it looks like that's bearing itself out. Let's see, that story, how did they put it in here? This is the Post, Devlin Barrett and Matt Zapotowski. The law enforcement investigation into possible coordination between Russia and the Trump campaign has identified a current White House official as a significant person of interest, showing that the probe is reaching into the highest levels of government, according to people familiar with the matter. The senior White House advisor under scrutiny by investigators is someone close to the president, according to these people, who would not further identify the official. The revelation comes as the investigation appears to be entering a more overtly active phase, with investigators shifting from work that has remained largely hidden from the public to conducting interviews and using a grand jury to issue subpoenas. Subpoenas, right? So Louise Mensch is right? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Sealed indictments, of course, would be a different thing from subpoenas from a grand jury. You would, that would be further down the road, the indictments. But, people sometimes conflate these things, official sounding documents like subpoenas and indictments, and, it's all very law and order-ish, and so people mix it up occasionally, whatever. Where were we with this? Right. The revelation comes as the investigation appears to be entering a more overtly active phase. Sources emphasize that investigators remained keenly interested in people who had previously wielded influence in the Trump campaign and administration but are no longer a part of it. There's that, including former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and former campaign chairman Paul Manafort. Flynn resigned in February. We know all about that, of course, over contacts with Kislyak. Current administration officials who have acknowledged contacts with Russian officials include President Trump's son-in-law, as well as Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Secretary of State Rex Everything Tillerson. People familiar with the investigation said the intensifying effort does not mean criminal charges are near, or that any such charges will result at all, ever. It's entirely possible. Earlier this week, Deputy Attorney General Rod J. Rosenstein, right? Or did we decide it was Stein, right? Like or was it Steen? Gosh, now I can't even remember. Was it like, were people making the joke about it being Frankenstein or, dang it, who cares? All right, well, I care, but, I'm pretty sure that didn't we decide it was going to be Stein? Somewhere there was the pronunciation guide, but by now I've put that thing aside. The whole weekend has interceded. Anyway, we now, of course, have Robert, and I'm going to go with Mueller, I think, is the pronunciation I'm going to land on for the special counsel. Unclear exactly how Mueller's leadership will affect the direction of the probe, and he's already bringing in new people to work on the team, the Post was reporting. Although the case began quietly last July as an effort to determine whether any Trump associates coordinated with Russian operatives to meddle in the campaign, the election, the investigative work now being done by the FBI also includes determining whether any financial crimes were committed by people close to the president. And that's what I think people began to, what made people start to think about Jared Kushner. The people familiar with the matter said the probe has sharpened into something more fraught for the White House, the FBI, and the Justice Department, particularly because of the public steps investigators now know they now need to take, these people said. When subpoenas are issued or interviews are requested, it is possible the people being asked to talk or provide documents will reveal publicly what they were asked about. A small group of lawmakers known as the Gang of Eight. Did we get another gang here? I wasn't even looking. They were notified. Oh, well, okay. It's our standing Gang of Eight. Okay. So the Gang of Eight, which if they don't describe it here for you, I will do it a little bit later on. The Gang of Eight was notified of the change in tempo and focus in the investigation at a classified briefing Wednesday evening, the people familiar with the matter said. Then FBI Director James Comey publicly confirmed the existence of the investigation in March. A Justice Department spokeswoman, Sarah Isgur Flores, said, "I can't confirm or deny the existence or non-existence." I love that they throw that in there. Of investigations or targets of investigations. An FBI spokesman declined to comment. That was a whole paragraph telling you no one had any comment. They don't tell you about the Gang of Eight here. The Gang of Eight is the bipartisan leadership of both houses of Congress they make up the smallest number of people that you can inform if you, and be in compliance with the law, if you feel that the law requires notification to Congress. They screw with that all the time, like, for instance, occasionally telling only Jason Chaffetz that something has happened and then waiting for him to leak it, like Comey's letter. But when they go through normal channels and you're required to notify Congress, you tell the highest ranking majority party officer and closest ranking deputy in the House, and similarly tell the minority party. So you're talking about the Speaker of the House and Majority Leader for Republicans right now in the House of Representatives, and the Minority Leader and Minority Whip for Democrats in the House. And then you got to do the same thing over on the Senate side. Each of the two major parties' top two officials get notified. That's 2 and 2 and 2 and 2. That's 8. Gang of 8. Okay. Just so you, I guess if you come across that number, sometimes there are other gangs of 8 out there. I think they made a gang of 8 to do the or to formulate and then disassociate themselves from and ultimately disavow the comprehensive immigration reform proposal a couple of years ago, too. That just happened to be 8 senators. No relationship to this gang of 8. All right. So where were we with this? I mean, I think we can probably drop this Post story. You got the background that you needed out of it. And from this comes the hint that they're looking at possibly financial crimes. And that led everybody to think, oh, Jared Kushner, he could be committing financial crimes. And then by the end of Friday, people were speculating, oh, it may be that, well, Kushner was said to have been a big fan of the Fire Comey idea and was pushing it hard. And actually, people were reporting that Bannon was against it, which is remarkable because his instincts are usually pretty terrible. But this was also a big blow for Jared Kushner is a big moderating influence in the White House. He was pushing to fire Comey, and that was incredibly stupid and has created a firestorm. And the best explanation people could come up with for why he would be pushing to fire Comey was that Comey was considering expanding the investigation to financial and financial-related crimes. And people thought, oh, I wonder if that will include his sister selling green cards in China. That would have been a pretty quick turnaround, though. But I guess, inside the FBI, in terms of decisions that a FBI director might make about, hey, let's have a look at this, yeah, that was plenty of time. That could certainly have been on the radar for Comey. How firing him would make it disappear from the radar, I do not know, but neither did Jared Kushner, I guess, if he was actually encouraging this. So over the weekend, people really spent the weekend assuming that this unnamed person really was Jared Kushner. And Kushner continued to kind of make news over the weekend, particularly on Saturday, when he really shouldn't have been making any news at all because it was Shabbat and he should have been being quiet. And Rebecca Romans has this suggestion that maybe it was the case that Kushner needs a spokesperson to speak for him on Shabbat when he's not supposed to be out there. That's a possibility, I guess. I was a little surprised, by the way. I read, did I mention to you that I did, I think, that Kushner had gotten he claims to have gotten a special dispensation from a rabbi for himself and Ivanka to fly to Saudi Arabia on Friday night, which would be a violation of the Shabbat rules ordinarily. And he occasionally has gotten these dispensations, although this is a source of some curiosity. He has never named the rabbi who does this, and probably with good reason. One good reason might be that no rabbi did it and he's lying. That's what, I mean, I don't know, does that count as a good reason? It's a good reason if you're him. Like, that would be good if nobody found out that I was lying about this. Another good reason, though, and perhaps a more legitimate good reason, would be if I were that rabbi, even if I were doing this in entirely the most conscientious fashion possible, if I genuinely believed that these were dispensations, one, that I was entitled to give, and two, that really needed to be given, I would say I don't really want a whole lot. I don't want it generally known who I am because people are crazy. They'll come and bother me about this. And I don't need that in my life. Like, I'm a rabbi. You wanted some spiritual advice. I gave it to you. I don't really think I need to be pestered about this. I'm being asked the question. But I'm being interrupted. Marcy Wheeler is asking me. She's retweeting a Brian Beutler tweet. Why did I have this open? All right. Brian was saying Democratic leaders are terrified of the I word. They shouldn't be. And it's in the New Republic, which is great because I don't really care about the New Republic. But I like Brian Beutler, and it sounds like a fun piece. Democrats should proudly call for Trump's impeachment. Some rank-and-file members are doing it. Why aren't the party's leaders showing the same courage of conviction? It's a tough thing to do. And when you're in a leadership, you're responsible for an awful lot of people, and you will tar a lot of people with impeachment talk who don't yet think that it's safe for them to run in their districts that way. So the leaders are being conscientious about it. But Empty Wheel, Marcy is asking, did you write a really insightful piece about how Clinton's impeachment was done to scare Dems on impeachment going forward? Yes, I did. Do I remember where I put it? No, I don't. I guess I'll have to answer Marcy on this one because she's probably not listening. She's busy typing, and I'm going to interrupt my speaking. Should I do this? Was this exciting radio, live radio, for me to do this? Now where did I put it? I don't know. Okay, so you get to see the news before it happens on Twitter. Before I even tweeted this thing, there's you knew what was coming. So I guess that counts as exciting radio. Anyway, sorry for the interruption, but I don't know. I like to make sure that I'm up on what people are suggesting for discussion on the show. Anyway, Jared's weekend was eventful, I guess. I really would like to know what is up with the rabbi, only to find out whether there really is a rabbi doing this stuff, because it does strike me that he could just be saying that. And I say that only because it was said that he was chiefly responsible for planning the trip. So why would he plan it to include Friday and Saturday travel, which would otherwise be prohibited? If it was up to him when they go, I mean, I guess it makes a certain amount of sense. Like, to you and me, I guess maybe that's it. You and I planning the thing would say, well, let's go Friday. We'll include a weekend. That's good. Travel is something that should be, planned that way. But if you're a president of the United States, you can just go any day, any time. Maybe he thought he needed to be around Monday through Friday to handle any kind of emergencies. But one, Trump isn't going to handle any emergencies, although the rest of the staff is going to try. But two, the United States government kind of revolves around the presidency. If he wants to leave on this trip on Wednesday, that's something they can arrange for in the presidency. It's just one of those powerful offices. But for whatever reason, he decided to go with the traditional route and leave on Friday. So now he needed a special dispensation. Anyway, on the way there, these two bombshells drop, and they were on a 14-hour flight, of course, to Saudi Arabia. And so you begin to see stories like this one in Vox. Let me open it up here and get our byline here. Dara Lind. It's becoming increasingly clear that Jared Kushner is part of Trump's Russia problem. So, let's see. Jared Kushner, the young, pragmatic, hard-headed businessman out to modernize the U.S. government and moderate the worst tendencies of his father-in-law, Donald Trump. But what if, instead, Jared is not a panacea for the chaotic White House, but one of its biggest problems? This is certainly a question that deserves to be asked at this point, because it's looking an awful lot like it may be true. As the Trump administration's been sent into a death spiral, as they put it, and a lot of people use the terminology, over the firing of FBI Director James Comey last week, a failed move to curtail the Justice Department investigation into contact between his campaign and the Russian government, Kushner hasn't been the adult in the room urging caution and scrupulousness. To the contrary, he's been urging aggression and retaliation. And the White House's reaction to the appointment of Robert Mueller as special counsel in the Russia inquiry, including a possible attempt to use ethics rules — we'll have to talk a lot about this — to use ethics rules to limit the scope of his investigation, Mueller's investigation, shows that somebody in the White House is deeply worried about what might happen if Kushner were included in the probe. I said there was a lot to get to in this. So we'll stick to the Kushner angle right now. But yeah, we've got some things stuck away to talk about the ethics rules. That might be something we want to involve Armando in at some point, but perhaps a different day for that discussion, because that could take all day too. As Trump deals with scandals surrounding his former national security advisor, Mike Flynn, and his former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, now the family businessman, that is to say, the family businessman, because it is a family business that Trump owns, it's not a major international corporation, could have another problem right inside his own house. It was surprising enough to people who had bought into the narrative that Kushner and wife Ivanka Trump were steadying influences on the president, that he hadn't warned Trump not to fire FBI Director James Comey, a move that anyone could have predicted would blow up in the administration's face. In fact, Kushner appears to have been generally supportive of the firing, according to the New York Times. By now, it's clear that Kushner, at least sometimes, is the person who wants to lash out at the investigators. Here's what happened, according to the reports from the New York Times, when the Trump administration found out that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein had appointed Mueller as special counsel to lead the Trump-Russia probe. Most of those gathered recommended that the president adopt a conciliatory stance and release a statement accepting Mr. Rosenstein's decision and embracing a swift investigation that would clear the cloud of suspicion hovering over the West Wing. Mr. Kushner, who had urged Trump to fire Comey, was one of the few dissenting voices, urging the president to counterattack, according to two senior administration officials. After a brief discussion, however, calmer heads prevailed. Whose heads were they? And Mr. Trump's staff huddled over a computer just outside the Oval Office to draft the statement that was ultimately released, asserting the president's innocence and determination to move on. Trump's eventual statement was actually much less conciliatory than prior presidents have been, yet Kushner wanted to be even harsher, despite the existing concerns about the independence at the Department of Justice. It's also interesting that, according to Reuters' Julia Edwards-Ainsley, the White House is considering trying to hobble Mueller and using a regulation barring Mueller from investigating anyone his former law firm had represented. In practice, that would be Kushner and former campaign head Paul Manafort. The firm that Mueller came from apparently did represent those two in some capacity in the past, or might even currently represent them, though it's never been alleged that Mueller represented them himself. It was just somebody else at his firm doing that work. Okay. And by the way, I do see just now Josh Marshall writing that Michael Flynn will invoke the Fifth Amendment in declining the Senate's subpoena, which I don't know exactly how he plans to do that, and if he's planning not to appear, although I'm not certain what's being subpoenaed. We'll take a look at that. And another sort of technical side of the legal issues here, it may be, if they're looking for his testimony, traditionally you have to go and assert the Fifth Amendment. You can't just say, I'm not going to show up for it, and say the Fifth Amendment excuses me from doing that. We'll see. We'll talk to practitioner Armando about that one at some point later on. All right. Where were we with this one? Yes, right. So the legal experts had said that an ethics rule existed that might prevent Mueller from investigating anyone his former firm had represented. Now, they further said, though, that rule can be waived by the Justice Department, which appointed Mueller. He did not represent Kushner or Manafort directly at his former law firm. So if the department, though, did not grant a waiver, Mueller would be barred from investigating Kushner or Manafort. And that could greatly diminish the scope of the probe, experts said. Another good reason, though, by the way, to sort of double things up, belt and suspenders to the extent possible, and also have these investigations conducted by independent commissions or inside of the Congress, or even by a second special prosecutor. That might not be a bad move. How would that look if the Justice Department came back and said, well, we are going to issue this waiver, but or they may decide not to, and they may say, out of an abundance of caution, we're appointing a special prosecutor from a different firm specifically tasked with the job of handling any material that the special prosecutor, the lead special prosecutor, might refer to this secondary special prosecutor for investigation out of concern that it might violate this particular ethics rule were Mr. Mueller to be the lead investigator here. That would be an interesting thing. Now you got two special investigators. Nice backfire. I don't know if they're going to need to do it that way, but it would be a fun play nonetheless. For all the reporting that President Trump is still deeply committed to Mike Flynn, this proposed solution, as they say in quotes here, to the Mueller investigation wouldn't protect Flynn, but it would protect Manafort, who has been out of the Trump family's orbit for quite some time, and it would protect Kushner. So if you're looking for, well, why would they assert such a thing? It doesn't even help Flynn. True, it does kind of help Manafort, but do they really care about Manafort? More to the point, perhaps it helps Kushner an awful lot. So, what could Kushner be worried about? He does appear to have been relatively close to the disgraced Flynn. According to at least one report from NBC News' Peter Alexander, he and Ivanka Trump were the ones who assured Flynn he could get the job of National Security Advisor at a top meeting at a meeting at Trump Tower, I should say, after the election. Alexander said Ivanka Trump and Kushner told Flynn that his loyalty to the family would be rewarded. So this is, of course, at the point at which they already knew he was under investigation. He apparently revealed to them that he was under FBI investigation. They said, don't worry about it. We can make it happen anyway. Kushner's meetings with Russian officials were enough to bring him onto the radar of the Senate Intelligence Committee's Trump-Russia probe, which is questioning all Trump world figures who had contacts with Russia, and his failure to disclose all those meetings, even when applying for a security clearance, has raised some eyebrows. Democratic Representative Don Beyer of Virginia has called for Kushner's clearance to be stripped, and there have been others who have joined him in that call, by the way. At least one figure within the Trump White House saw Kushner's contacts with Russia as a disaster waiting to happen for the administration, and that was Steve Bannon. Although, again, you got to take that with a grain of salt, because you'll recall that a couple weeks ago we were talking about Steve Bannon trying to wage internal White House backstabbing war against Kushner because they're in something of a power struggle. Remember when the Breitbart papers first, the Breitbart network first began launching attacks on Kushner and then had to be warned off of doing that, and the word had apparently gone out from Bannon, don't you do it. And so they outsourced it immediately to the Daily Caller instead. During a power struggle between Kushner and Bannon in early April, the Times reported that Mr. Bannon has told confidants that he believes Mr. Kushner's contact with Russians and his expected testimony before Congress on the subject will become a major distraction for the White House. Kushner won that power struggle, though. Perhaps Bannon's warnings about Kushner and Russia were discarded as just an attempt to weaken a rival, which in part they almost certainly were. But in retrospect, it's becoming clear that Bannon wasn't wrong. The idea that Kushner was some sort of moderating influence on Donald Trump was always a little, more than a little overblown. There was never much evidence that Trump was being moderated. What's becoming clear, though, is that Kushner isn't just incapable of stopping the president's intemperance or preventing his ethical lapses, and that he's not simply a businessman trying to maximize his own profits either. If Kushner has or is a Russia problem, that means that the current investigations go to the beating family heart of the Trump White House. That could set up a very, very nasty fight indeed. So I think that's probably pretty insightful and a good reminder of what's really in the offing here. But speaking of Kushner, more substantively, speaking of Kushner, I wanted to bring up this thought, and I kind of hinted at it earlier, but here's something, some media criticism for the day, and I'll pull up just one representative example, but I think we can illustrate the point even better after we read it a little bit, or at least the headline, and take a look at Google News, right? I have here, I guess probably among the most prominent of the headlines of this fashion, New York Times, May 18th here, the headline, $110 billion weapons sale to Saudis has Jared Kushner's personal touch. You no doubt saw stories like that. And I guess if you go to Google News and you put in Jared Kushner and Saudi, or maybe Saudis, what should we put? I'll put in Saudi, an arms deal, and I don't even want to put the number in there, but you'll be presented with a number of headlines. Let's see what's up at the top here. Trump signs Kushner negotiated $100 billion Saudi arms deal. That was CNN. The Hill, as Kushner called Lockheed's CEO to get a better arms deal for Saudi Arabia. That was the crux of the story. You remember all that. That not only did he have a hand in negotiating this thing, but the big deal was that he called the CEO of Lockheed to get a better deal. Jared Kushner intervened to get the Saudis a cheaper missile system in $110 billion deal. That's Newsweek. Click out of there before any other video starts. Jared Kushner personally intervened in Saudi arms deal, says a report that was, Press TV. Who's Press TV? I don't know. Axios. How Jared Kushner helped secure the Saudi arms deal. That's yesterday's. I should probably look at that one because I am curious about this. Let's see. How Jared Kushner sealed the Saudi arms deal from Forward. Weirder sources here. Newsmax, New York Times, Kushner hands-on broker of $110 billion Saudi arms deal. You get the idea. And there's a million of them. I wonder if the Axios one, Axios not always known for really getting your nitty-gritty details out there, but I don't know. There's somehow something about this hints at more information. By the way, all the pictures illustrating the jaunt to Saudi Arabia are amazing, especially to see Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner in among the Saudi royalty and the Wahhabi ranking, not royalty, but leadership. It's an interesting thing to see. Of course, Jared Kushner being famously Jewish and all this, and Steve Bannon being famously Islamophobic and all this. It made for some interesting photos. Everybody was very, they did a pretty good job standing on protocol. And I think it actually made everybody comfortable. It makes everybody else in the world uncomfortable to deal with Saudi royalty and their pomp, but the Trumps love it. Lots of gold. Let me see what Axios has to say here. President Trump's first full day in Saudi Arabia was busy, to say the least. He participated in welcoming ceremonies and was awarded the Collar of Abdulaziz Al Saud Medal at the Royal Court Palace. But one thing that slipped through the cracks was how Jared Kushner played an instrumental role in securing the $110 billion arms deal. By the way, if you saw any video of Donald Trump getting the Collar of Abdulaziz Al Saud Medal, then you were likely struck, as many of us were, by the weird sort of bow/curtsy that he does in receiving the medal. And remember that bowing to the Saudi king was a big deal, and oh my God, and can't have any of that, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're getting a medal hung around your neck, are you bending over or are you bowing? Does intent matter in all this? Anyway, lots of discussion. I'm just kind of skim through all of this. Maybe I'll skim the Axios one later, but the New York Times piece was representative of everything. And it goes on to assert, we don't have an exact dollar figure on this weapons system thing. Somebody has to have an exact number somewhere, but it's referred to with price tags of everything from just plain $100 billion plus to, I've seen the other number that most frequently gets hung on it is $110 billion. But here's the story. The New York Times one is, like I said, very typical of what we read over the weekend. On the afternoon of May 1st, President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, welcomed a high-level delegation of Saudis to a gilded reception room next door to the White House and delivered a brisk pep talk. Let's get this done today. So this is before the trip, May 1st. Mr. Kushner was referring to a $100 billion plus arms deal that the administration hoped to seal with Saudi Arabia in time to announce it during Mr. Trump's visit to the kingdom this weekend. The two sides discussed a shopping list that included planes, ships, and precision-guided bombs. Then an American official raised the idea of the Saudis buying a sophisticated radar system designed to shoot down ballistic missiles. I guess they hadn't been thinking about this to this point or whatever. And that is interesting. Okay, but so like we said, they're already on board with buying traditional stuff, ships, planes, and precision-guided bombs. Then somebody says, hey, how would you like this missile system? And as it turns out, it's called the THAAD, or I don't know how they pronounce it, THAAD missile system. Is it even discussed in this piece? I just saw it in passing, but maybe we'll Google it just so we know what we're talking about here. That is it came up the other day, I think, right? Because that was the system that they were wanting to sell/force South Korea to pay for in order to defend itself from North Korea's renewed missile threat. The THAAD system is the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, THAAD. Formerly the Theater High Altitude Area Defense, but now Terminal. Why Terminal rather than Theater? I don't know. But you'll have to talk to somebody in that business. But that's basically it. United States Army's anti-ballistic missile defense system designed to shoot down short, medium, and intermediate range ballistic missiles in their terminal phase by intercepting with a hit-to-kill approach. I believe we have read that before and marveled at that because that seems like the best way to kill things with weapons. Hit them with them. All right. And, you like we said, with certain kinds of weapons, I suppose a near miss will work. Hand grenades and horseshoes, as a matter of fact, which can be used as weapons. Ask me how. Anyway, so interesting. I hadn't noticed that nuance in the New York Times piece earlier that the THAAD missile system was like an add-on, an upsell to the Saudis. Sensing that the cost might be a problem, several administration officials said Mr. Kushner picked up the phone and called Marilyn A. Hewson, the chief executive of Lockheed Martin, which makes the radar system, and asked her whether she could cut the price. As his guests watched slack-jawed, Ms. Hewson told him she would look into it, officials said. Now, I'm going to rush into the rest of the article here in order to keep us enthralled the way most of these reports did, and then we'll turn back and ask some questions. Mr. Kushner's personal intervention in the arms sale is further evidence of the Trump White House's readiness to dispense with custom in favor of informal, hands-on deal-making. It also offers a window into how the administration hopes to change America's position in the Middle East, emphasizing hard power and haggling over traditional diplomacy. The Trump administration is expected to frame the deal worth about $110 billion over 10 years as a symbol of America's renewed commitment to security in the Persian Gulf. But former officials pointed out that President Barack Obama, whose arms sales to Saudi Arabia totaled $115 billion, that's the same number basically, had already approved several of the weapons in the package. So stop for just a second and say, yes, to the extent that the Trump administration is trumpeting their success in concluding this arms deal, it's worth knowing that much of the deal had been agreed to in principle previously by the Obama administration, and it isn't some sort of magic that Donald Trump is able to work in deal making, and no, it's not like he's been magically able to work these things out in between rounds of golf. They were already in the works. What was new here, though, was the addition of the THAAD missile system. But we sort of ignore this. But again, we'll turn back and analyze this afterwards. Both sides had an incentive to herald this as a new era in Gulf cooperation, said Derek H. Chollet. No idea how that's pronounced, Chollet, who served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs under Mr. Obama. I see this as largely continuity. What has changed, Mr. Chollet said, is that the House of Saud, a good reminder of where we stand with these guys, is now dealing directly with a member of the Trump family. It's quite normal for them to sit down with the son-in-law of a president and to do a deal, he said. it's more normal for them than for any previous administration. And it's normal among the Trumps and it's normal among the Sauds. They're both essentially operating as royal families here. The White House and Lockheed declined to comment on the call between Mr. Kushner and Ms. Hewson or on the broader arms sale, which helps maintain the illusion here. While Mr. Kushner's middle-of-the-meeting call to a military contractor was unorthodox, current and former officials said it did not appear to raise legal issues. Lockheed is the sole manufacturer of the anti-missile system known as the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD. Instead, the episode was reminiscent of Lockheed's decision in February to cut the price of F-35 fighter jets it was selling to the Pentagon after Mr. Trump complained to Ms. Hewson that the planes were too expensive. Mr. Kushner, White House officials said, began building ties to members of the Saudi royal family during the transition. He was at the table when his father-in-law hosted the Deputy Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, at a lunch in the state dining room in March. And he offered a strategic overview of the Saudi-American relationship at the meeting this month, according to an agenda obtained by the New York Times. But officials emphasized that Mr. Kushner's work on the deal was part of a government-wide effort that includes the State Department, the Defense Department, and the National Security Council, who I'm sure, all of which had no comment on anything, and certainly no inkling that he was going to do anything like that either, and probably wouldn't have permitted it if they did. They also said the arms sale would be only one element of Mr. Trump's busy 2-day stop in Saudi Arabia, which also included a meeting with King Salman at the royal court, a conference with the Persian Gulf, with other Persian Gulf allies, a broader summit meeting with the leaders of Muslim countries, at which he would America-splain Islam to them, and a visit to the new center dedicated to combating terrorism and extremism, where they had the orb. The showcase event will be a speech in which the officials said Mr. Trump would seek to unify the Muslim world against the scourge of extremism. Good luck. Stephen Miller, Mr. Trump's senior policy advisor, is writing the speech, which officials said would serve as an answer to the landmark address to the Islamic world that Mr. Obama gave in Cairo in 2009. That's why he had to do it. White House officials have consulted Mr. Obama's speech and predicted a starkly different tone from Mr. Trump. I don't know how they did with that. And we can check in on that, and those reviews. Let's see. Is there anything else that I need to pull out of this article? The rest of it is just sort of background prior to his landing in Saudi Arabia, so kind of old news at this point. Here's where I want to turn back. How much was the deal worth? Did we learn that from the article? Sort of, kind of, right? $110 billion there and thereabouts. That's the number that we see. We've seen everything. I've seen somebody put a more precise number on it and say it was $109 billion. And it's unclear, basically, what the price is here. Here's my question, media criticism-wise. If you don't know the actual number on the deal, right? And it is interesting how we wave things off this way. I mean, this is what the number system is supposed to make it possible to do anyway. But we're waving away up to $5 billion or $10 billion here as if it's nothing, right? Well, what is it? How much is the deal worth? Well, it's $110 billion. $110 billion. Well, I don't know. It could be 100. I don't know. It's $100 billion plus, though. Like, we don't need precision when it comes to $10 billion. I mean, that's a large amount of money. We should really be precise about this. But when there's 110 of them, I mean, that's what, look, this was an Arabic invention. Maybe that's why it's working so well for them. Arabic numerals and the concept of zeros as placeholders and base 10 counting. But okay, we wave off $10 billion. Or somebody else reported that it's $109 billion, and the Times says $110 billion. So far, nobody has stood there and said, aha, liars, fake news, lying media. Is it 109 or is it $110 billion? And everybody rolls their eyes and says, who cares? It's pretty much the same. Clearly, they're talking about the same thing. Yes, they are. That's true. But again, are we now yada-yadaing $1 billion? I mean, if I said to you, I'm going to give you an amount of money here. This is going to be your money. This is how much you're going to get paid this year. It's somewhere between $0 and $1 billion. Do you yada yada that? No, of course not. On the other hand, if I tell you I was going to pay you $110 billion, but then I said, bad news, it's $109 billion, you don't fret. Okay, so everything's relative. The Arabs and their Arabic numerals are a part of this. Albert Einstein is a part of this one. We got all the scientists working on this since antiquity. Okay. So, but the real question I have is, how much money are they talking about here? And the answer is we don't really know. What was is $110 billion the price they settled on? And if so, what was the first price? What was the asking price for the THAAD missile system? Do we know how much the Koreans had to pay for THAAD? Let's see. The very next thing in Google here is THAAD Korea. Let's Google that. Do we get a number here? Is there a price? Do we have to Google the cost? Will somebody put that up front? In other words, here's the issue. We found out how much they're paying, but we don't know how much they saved. And by the way, how much, here's one that had a number on it. Trump, South Korea should pay $1 billion for the missile defense system. President Trump wants South Korea to pay $1 billion for the THAAD missile system. We're having the Saudis pay $110 million for $1 billion for their THAAD missile system. How great was the deal that Jared Kushner got them? More to the point, really, if we don't know how much the original price was, and we don't know how much they're paying now with any precision, and we don't know what the difference is, do we know that Jared Kushner saved them anything? I mean, there's the point of reading out all those headlines. There's a billion headlines that say Jared Kushner, boy genius, has saved the Saudis so much money, and he was so brash about it, and he just was like, to hell with convention. I'll pick up the phone and I'll use my personal connections. I'll call the CEO of Lockheed Martin and I will say, listen here, CEO, I have a sense that the cost of this THAAD missile system, I got some friends here from Saudi Arabia, and we just told them about your THAAD missile system, and guess what? They want to buy one. Fantastic, great news. But I have a sense, as the article, that the article puts it this way, that the cost is a problem, that it's prohibitive. In other words, they'd like to have a THAAD missile system, but they don't want to pay for it. Well, okay, maybe that's unfair. They want to pay for it, but they don't want to pay as much. They don't want to pay list price, whatever that might be, for the THAAD missile system. And how do you even know? I mean, I don't think if you go to Lockheed Martin's website and not only will they not put the price there, they probably don't even do the convenience and of offering you, as many sites do. Well, okay, put in your zip code and we'll tell you. A representative will contact you via email and let you know approximately how much the THAAD missile system will cost you. Who knows what they even do for pricing? But like I said, the media criticism thing here is, if you don't know what the price difference was, and all you're really able to report about the conversation is this. So I have a sense that the price is problematic, but the Saudis are interested in it. Can you give them a break on the price? And what's the CEO's answer? What was her name? We'll scroll back up to try and get that. I'm in the wrong article anyway, so it won't help. We'll scroll up here. Marilyn Hewson. There's 2 L's in that Marilyn, by the way, it looks like. So look here, Hewson. Hewson, we have a problem. The Saudis would like to buy this missile system, but it costs too much. And the Saudis, they're hard pressed for cash these days. They're just billionaires themselves. How much to buy your THAAD missile system? Well, I got to tell you, Jared, it's a hugely expensive system. But I won't give you any numbers. That's my sales department is going to be the guys that do that. They're going to get upset if I put a number on it. Cause there's all kinds of things that go into it. Like, how much does it cost to protect South Korea from North Korean missiles? That's $1 billion. How much does it cost to protect Saudi Arabia from whose missiles? It's a good question. I don't know. there was a time when they might have felt that they needed to protect themselves from Iraqi missiles. That would be Saddam Hussein's Iraq. We, of course, remember Gulf War I. Iranian missiles, there's a huge tension, of course, Iran being the center of the Shiite Muslim world for the most part, certainly the power center, and Saudi Arabia being the power center and spiritual center of the Sunni Muslim world. And they do have to deal with each other all the time, of course. And of course, Shiite Muslims make pilgrimages to Saudi Arabia just as Sunnis do, but there's tension there too. Do they feel like they have to defend themselves from Iranian missiles? It's possible. It's also possible they might not need this thing at all, and they just needed to have a Jared Kushner win. It is interesting that it isn't until Jared Kushner meets with them and needs to work a deal that the Saudis think about buying a THAAD anti-missile system. That's interesting in its own right. But they call and they say, listen, Ms. Houston, we need a price break. And she says, not 10%, not 15%, not 20%. She says, I'll look into it. And that's the end of the conversation. And there's no more details here. And there's no numbers in here. Did Jared Kushner get them a discount on this missile system or not? Because if he did, that's a story. Fine. If he didn't, that's also a story. I mean, now it's a story. It wouldn't have been a story then. But to have 2-3 dozen headlines that say Jared Kushner has his personal touch in this, he totally negotiated this, and he didn't even negotiate it. He calls and he says, hey, they need a discount. She says, I'll look into it. Now, has she done looking? Has she come back? Should she put a price on it? If so, what's the number? Why is this not in any of the stories? And I mean, like I said, I've seen some stories say it was a $109 billion deal and some stories say it was a $110 billion deal. Did he raise the price accidentally? Maybe that's what happened. Mr. Kushner, it says here, was referring to a $100 billion plus arms deal. Well, 100 billion, that's 100. Now up at the top, it says it's 110. He put $10 billion extra dollars in it. How did that happen? I don't know. And how does it happen that in Korea it costs $1 billion? And in Saudi Arabia, it costs $110 billion, and this is such a great deal. And where did the idea come from that Saudi Arabia wanted this? The beginning of the story seems to say, well, and other stories on this same deal, and the one that was signed, they made sure to have a signing for Trump right away. We've got to have something for him to sign. He knows how to do that. We're going to have him sign something as soon as he gets there. And it was this big deal. But it wasn't the $110 billion part for the THAAD missiles, although a lot of stories seem to, I think, conflate the two deals. Although maybe they tried to do that, or maybe they added it in there. But there was other reports saying that there was something like $350 billion worth of arms being sold. And that's the deal they were inking in the photo op. Whether or not the THAAD missiles were included in it, I don't know. But if they were, then we should have a number about how much did that cost. What is that number? Why are we not getting that? If they weren't, then that just goes back to the old point, which is to say that nothing new was negotiated here. What I'm saying is that all of these headlines about Jared Kushner being a brilliant negotiator here are, I think, to this point, based on the facts, unwarranted. We don't know if he saved anything. We don't know what her answer was. We don't know how much he saved. If he's a brilliant businessman and he saved billions of dollars, even if it's $2 billion, I mean, I guess we'd think that was peanuts. But $2 billion is $2 billion. I'll take it, right? Say so. But nothing. But what they did need was for Jared Kushner to start getting good press again. And maybe that's what Jared Kushner's spokesperson does on the White House taxpayer-paid dime on a trip like this. Make sure that people write about what a brilliant moderating influence and deal maker Jared Kushner is. Maybe that's what's really going on here, because I haven't seen any money in all this. Is that not, all of a sudden, that's the one metric that doesn't matter for the Donald Trump administration, is the dollars? Are you kidding me? Nothing else has ever mattered about the Donald Trump administration. Anyway, There's more to the Kushner story, of course. Washington Post, I guess we're getting close to the end here. We'll put this one on record. Has another story that I put in pocket from this morning. Kushner keeps most of his real estate, but offers few clues about potential White House conflicts. This is the closest we're going to get to getting more of doing the old, who is Jared Kushner and what is his background story? Here's why people think he's either got his own problem or is increasing the Donald Trump's problems, both on the Russia front and on the emoluments front. Amy Britton and Jonathan O'Connell, writing this piece for the Washington Post, as chief executive of his family's real estate empire, Jared Kushner planned 2 apartment projects across the street from each other in Jersey City. We learned all about those when his sister was selling green cards for them the other day. Both would be luxury skyscrapers, complete with retail space and sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline. A new crosswalk would connect them, intended to link the 2 Kushner company developments practically and visually. Probably skywalk as opposed to crosswalk, but okay. When Kushner, when he prepared an ethics plan ahead of joining the White House as a top advisor to his father-in-law, President Trump, he drew a curious distinction between the 2 projects. He sold his stake in one while keeping his share of up to $5 million in the other. Kushner, 36, who is emerging as a singularly powerful figure in the Trump White House, is keeping nearly 90% of his vast real estate holdings even after resigning from the family business and pledging a clear divide between his private interests and public duties. The value of his retained real estate interests is between $132 million and $407 million and could leave him in a position to financially benefit from his family's business. The documents reflect the opaque decisions that Kushner and his attorneys have made to allow him to keep much of his outside investments while seeking to remain within the boundaries that government ethics officials would find acceptable. And who even knows what they may be. In other words, the report is he's still holding on to exactly the kind of assets that would put him in pretty serious conflict of interest and emoluments jeopardy in the future. And then, of course, there were the visas and that issue, which came up again. By the way, the White House says Kushner has recused himself from discussions of the EB-5 visa program. And we know how all the recusals are going over there in the Trump administration and among Republicans in general. And they're not worth much, to say I think the most we can say about him. That's the best thing we can say about him. There's also, in addition to all of these and the ethics issues, the ethics rules that we mentioned about trying to keep Robert Mueller from being able to investigate Kushner or Manafort because his former firm represented them. There's another ethics twist out there, also being reported by one of the big 2, this one from the New York Times again. White House moves to block ethics inquiry into ex-lobbyists on the payroll. Eric Lipton reporting this one. The Trump administration, in a significant escalation of its clash with the government's top ethics watchdog, has moved to block an effort to disclose any ethics waivers granted to former lobbyists who have worked in the White House or federal agencies. Remember that became a problem and that they were granting waivers left and right. We're going to drain the swamp. No lobbyists are going to work for our administration except this one, this one, this one, and this one, and this one. And we're keeping our promise because we established these rules blocking lobbyists from working in our administration. I just waived those rules every time someone asked. The latest conflict came in recent days when the White House, in a highly unusual move, sent a letter to Walter M. Schaub, Jr., the head of the Office of Government Ethics, asking him to withdraw a request that he had sent to every federal agency for copies of those waivers. In the letter, the administration challenged his legal authority to demand the information. Dozens of former lobbyists and industry lawyers are working within the Trump administration, which has hired them at a much higher rate than the previous administration. Keeping the waivers confidential would make it impossible to know whether any such officials are violating federal ethics rules or have been given a pass to ignore them. Mr. Schaub, who is in the final year of a 5-year term after being appointed by President Barack Obama, said he had no intention of backing down. It is an extraordinary thing, Mr. Schaub said of the White House request. I have never seen anything like it. Marilyn L. Glynn, who served as general counsel and acting director of the agency during the George W. Bush administration, called the move by the Trump White House unprecedented and extremely troubling. It challenges the very authority of the director of the agency and his ability to carry out the functions of the office, she said. In a statement issued Sunday evening, the Office of Management and Budget rejected the criticism and instead blamed Mr. Schaub, OMB, boy oh boy, saying his call for the information, issued in late April, was motivated by politics. What politics? Is he trying to influence an election? It's April 2017. The office said it remained committed to upholding ethical standards in the federal government. We're just not going to tell you how. This request, in both its expensive scope and breathless timetable, demanded that we seek further legal guidance, the statement said. The very fact that this internal discussion was leaked, again, blaming the leakers, implies that the data being sought is not being collected to satisfy our mutual high standard of ethics. President Trump signed an executive order in late January, he loves signing things, echoing language first endorsed by Mr. Obama, that prohibited lobbyists and lawyers hired as political appointees from working for 2 years on particular government matters that involved their former clients. In the case of former lobbyists, they could not work on the same regulatory issues they had been involved in. Both Mr. Trump and Mr. Obama reserved the right to issue waivers to this ban. Mr. Obama, unlike Mr. Trump, automatically made any such waivers public, offering detailed explanations. The exceptions were typically granted for people with special skills or when the overlap between the new federal work and prior job was minor. Ms. Glynn, who worked in the Office of Government Ethics for nearly 2 decades, said she had never heard of a move by any previous White House to block a request like Mr. Schaub's. She recalled how the Bush White House had intervened with a federal agency during her tenure to get information that she needed. Ethics watchdogs, as well as Democrats in Congress, have expressed concern at the number of former lobbyists taking high-ranking political jobs in the Trump administration. In many cases, they appear to be working on the exact topics they had previously handled on behalf of private sector clients, including, you'll never guess, oil and gas companies and Wall Street banks. Gee whiz. Well, anyway, you get the picture with that one, and there's more detail, and I will include that in our roundup. And Scott is back on the job, thankfully, to help me out with that one. I did okay on my own, I think, on Friday. Don't worry about me, Scott. It's we're doing just fine here. We've got to wrap up here, though, and get ready to hand the mics off to the guys with the real news in the after show coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you what's on tap for that so you can prepare your mind. Because if we didn't stuff enough stuff in it after the weekend for you today, well, they'll take care of the rest of that. Trump urged Muslims to practice tolerance. Can you believe it? And he finalized a massive arms deal with Saudi Arabia just to be sure that they would all become goddamn tolerant or will blow the hell out of you. Anyway, what else have they got here? More than 100 Notre Dame students, that was big in the news too, walked out of Mike Pence's commencement speech in protest of his policies. And the U.S. Supreme Court leaves a key campaign finance restriction in place. Yay, finally one remains in place. Let's see what it was. On the last half, they'll be reporting that the Trump administration has taken thousands of government records offline, but a new project is working hard to get them back. And Special Counsel Robert Mueller's threats to resign while FBI director reveal the depth of his character. All of that, plus, of course, the Connect, Unite, Act, Daily Kos community calendar, and more on the after show with Wink and Justice coming up next. If you are listening elsewhere and are not streaming Netroots Radio and want to hear the after show, easy enough to do. Netrootsradio.com will pick up that stream. Always remember, they've got a great programming lineup. But hey, that doesn't mean you're gonna not stick around for the folks, the good folks at We Act Radio and up in Rochester as well. Welcome again. Thanks for sticking with us.
From Daily Kos Radio on Netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waltman.
Thanks very much for listening. You know, it seems like progressive radio becoming kind of a hot property in the resistance era. Maybe there's a progressive radio station near you just starting up, and maybe they don't include us in their lineup, and maybe they ought to. Want to give them a call, recommend it, send them our email address, have them talk to us. Maybe we can be played on the radio just for fun near you.